We've had a lot of storms this summer, particularly June. My.
Yeah, it's been bad and windy.
Yeah. But you've seen a lot of different weather from your years here, haven't you?
Right.
Okay, what's the day today? 30th. July's almost over. July 30th, 2001, at the home of Bud and Shirley Bodin. What's the address here?
116 North 6th Street,
Right, just off Washington.
just off Washington.
Yeah,
And it is William Bodin.
Right.
It gets, so that there's no misunderstanding that Bud is his real name.
well, how'd you get the name Bud?
Well, I grew up with it way back from the family.
Did the family give it to you as a baby or a small
apparently,
child?
yeah. My sister,
Were you Buddy in those days?
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause-
Yes, I remember him being called Buddy by his school friends.
Mhm. So it sounds like you've known each other all your lives.
No,
No?
not really. I came here in the summertime and it just happens that Bud and I have a common relative. My mother's brother married Bud's father's sister.
Uh-huh.
So we each had the same cousin and we kind of knew of each other's existence probably in our later years and in our high school years. And that's how we actually met, started to date.
How old were you then?
So I was 17.
I just graduated from high school.
Right.
That summer we went together.
Right, from Bayfield High School.
Mm.
And you were living here as well?
Well, we just spent our summers here.
Uh-huh.
And I lived in Green Bay, but I was born here.
I see.
Well, their home is out at Samo, near the
Mhm.
fish hatchery. The folks home.
Right.
And so Bud went away that fall. I had another year in high school, and Bud went away to the University of Wisconsin and started studying there. He wanted to go into, I should let him tell this, wanted to go into electrical or mechanical engineering, and the war came along. And he left for the war for 6 years and didn't see him again for, he was gone. He had 2 leaves in that 6-year period, and we saw each other those 2 times. And it wasn't really a courtship, but it was a friendship through correspondence, which developed into our engagement.
Right, which happened then after the war.
Yes.
Yeah, we got married right away.
Married in what year then?
49.
1949.
Yeah. Well, Shirley, when did your family come here then?
Well, my father was born in Troy Center, Wisconsin, and he grew up there, but he had heard about Bayfield when he was 18 or 19 years old, and that there was a fruit explosion going on up here, and he thought he'd come up here. He was looking for something to do, and he came up here and fell in love with Bayfield. He arrived on April 10th, I think, 1910, and it was one of those beautiful days in Bayfield, and he just fell in love with it. And so he bought some property from Harvey Nurse, I think that was his name, Harvey,
Yeah.
the senior, and wanted to start a fruit farm and made plans to plant cherry trees and apple trees. And he did that, and then he met my mother and was married, and so then we kept the property, but that fruit business didn't work out for him, and he had to get other work. So he finally wound up with the Standard Oil Company in Ashland. They transferred him eventually to Green Bay, and I was about 3 years old then.
Right. Now, what was his name?
Wilmer Stewart Kennedy.
So you're Kennedy.
Yes.
And what about your grandparents? Where were they from?
Well, my father is Scotch-Irish, and my mother is German, and I really don't have a lot of information about my grandparents. I never really knew them because my father's father died when he was about 4 years old.
Oh.
And I didn't see his mother too often because she lived in Waukesha with my dad's two sisters. And she died when I was about 6. And my mother's parents were all dead before I was born. So,
Right.
but my mother was born in this country, but her family came from Germany. She had sisters that were born in Germany.
And what was her maiden name?
Schreer.
Mm-hmm.
That's Schroeer, and it's very hard for people to understand that word because there's so few Schreers around. And but as far as my father's family, my grandmother was more Scottish. My grandfather was Irish.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what was your mother's name?
Selma Schreer.
Mm-hmm. And now exactly where was this place?
Well, do you know the Jim Millers, Marge and Jim Miller?
Yeah.
That's my sister, and we were born in that house that they're living in.
Right on the highway there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my family loved Bayfield so much, and as I said, they kept the property here, and we spent our summers here, and that's how I feel so fortunate too, because growing up in Bayfield, it's just a wonderful experience. I love it, and lucky enough to wind up here.
Yeah. So you came back, you left when you were 3, is that right? And you came back when?
Well, then when we were married in 49,
Yeah.
that's when I came back to live here. Otherwise, I worked in Green Bay.
Right. And been here ever since?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Very happy to have been able to stay here.
Yeah, so I've been very lucky to end up here.
Mm-hmm.
Let me come over to you, Bud.
Okay.
Wait a second here and get... Okay, now there's a whole slew of Bodins
All right,
around
that's
here.
right.
Can you trace that ancestry for me?
Okay, my grandfather and the Bodin's grandfather came over from Sweden, and I suppose it was 1890, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather wound up in Ashland, working in the lumber yards and so forth. And their grandfather, I think, came over to the quarries and stuff over here. And that's Houghton.
Mm-hmm.
So actually I'm second cousins to these Bodins because my grandfather and their grandfather were brothers.
Right.
So that puts us down the line a little bit.
Right.
And
Now, what part of Sweden was your family from?
I'm not sure, but we've traced relatives and they're in Stockholm.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't get much more of an answer than that.
Mm-hmm. So you haven't been back over there to...
No, I haven't been back to Sweden.
Yeah.
But one of my cousins was fortunate enough to travel around, went to Sweden, met him, brought him back here. So for a while we had correspondence with him as cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And what were your grandparents' names?
my grandfather was Louis Bodin, or Louis.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, I think, was Emma.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as kids, we always called her Grandma Bodin, so
Right.
the first names are hard
Right.
to remember, but it was Emma Bodin.
Right. And how many kids are there in your family then?
Well, on the Bodin side, there were 6 with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
He had 3 brothers, 3 sisters.
And did they end up in this area too, or were they spread all over?
Spread pretty much all over. Duluth, a couple of the girls were up in Duluth all their lives. One was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, one in Milwaukee, one in St. Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So they close, but kind of scattered.
But your dad stayed here.
My dad stayed here.
So what did he end up, you said he was started out in the lumberyard in Ashland?
Well, that was my
Oh,
grandfather.
that was your grandfather, sorry.
And then my dad was working in Ashland. He worked Reinhardt's garage or whatever it was over there, kind of a machine shop business. And he went into World War I. And when he come back from there, he married my mother. She was raised in Houghton, and Dad bought property at Sioux River and settled there and started fishing.
Uh-huh.
He started out, of course there were no docks at Sioux River. He had a small skiff and of course ice fish in the wintertime.
And where were they living in?
What's the name of Jarrett's Road?
Oh, Kujarvik Road.
Oh, yes.
It was
Okay.
just a block up on the little knoll there,
Uh-huh.
on the south side of the road. He had 105 acres there. He owned both of the rivers and passed the mouth of the other river, which was quite a sand beach, but
Yeah.
I guess the DNR's got it now.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he would go out fishing in a small boat, not like these gill net tugs.
No, he started out with a skiff, an outboard, and like I say, and ice fish in the wintertime.
That must have been tough.
But when I was 2 years old, he moved to Bayfield. He was wanting to, so we could go to school and church and everything. And he teamed up with my uncle Ulrich Frostman, and they bought a place on Madeleine to fish.
Uh-huh.
And there they built their dock, ice house, cabins. It was a good operational place because it opened up so much faster in the spring than in the bay here, and also later in the wintertime. So they did a lot. They gained a lot, and of course at that time the price of fish was better in the spring too.
And where was that fish camp?
It's on what they call the north end of Madeleine, near the schoolhouse road.
And what's left of it?
We just sold the property 5 years ago. The docks are all deteriorated now. I maintained them for a long time, but
Yeah.
wooden docks in storms, they kept you going. So, and the sand is filled in, it's covered them up.
What about the buildings? Are they?
Well, the two cabins are left. They're on, the road cuts right through the property, but the cabins are there, and a twine shed, what they call a twine shed, a big shed for storage in the morning. The ice house we tore down was a big building. So actually it doesn't look like much of a place anymore.
Now, what year would that have been that he started that?
He started in
operation?
1926,
Out there?
yes,
And partners with Frostman.
yes.
Now, what's the relation of that Frostman to Jim? 'Cause
He
I'm
would have been an uncle to Jimmy.
Uncle, okay.
My mother is a Frostman,
Uh-huh.
so we go down that line too.
All intertwined here.
There's a lot of it, yes.
So your mother was a Frostman. Now, who were her folks?
Well, my grandfather was killed in the quarry about the time I was born, so I hardly knew him. His name was August. My grandmother was Sophia. And they lived in what is called Houghton. If you see the Frostman Road down there, that's they were owned a lot of property there.
Oh, okay. I've seen that. I wondered about that.
And it was a big house, just in a ways. But in a field there, it's all grown up now.
Yeah.
Big barn is down. They had quite a ways. But he did work at the quarries, along with his farming.
Now, which quarries would he have worked at?
That would be down, well, Bodin, Brownstone Bowl. There's several quarries in that area,
Right.
down at Houghton there.
Would he have worked on the Pikes quarry?
I don't know if he worked on that one or not.
Right.
You've been down at Bodin's Resort, seen the quarries.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that was the place that he was working.
Now that resort is from the other Bodin family. Is that right, or is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. That's,
Who were then cousins.
Dad was cousin to Elmer Bodin, which is Dick's father.
Right.
And so it's, okay,
You have to
Ted Bodin is
do a family
same
tree.
way. Yeah. So when they say, are you related? Yeah, we're related.
Yeah, and to the Frostmans.
Yeah.
Well, did your father then end up fishing all his life?
All his life. Mhm.
Yeah. And how old did he live to be?
He died at 69.
Uh-huh.
That was in what year? About 68, 68,
He died in 69.
69.
Yeah.
So he was born in 1900 then?
Yeah.
1899, wasn't it? I think that
I'm
was
a little
it.
confused on
I
that
think
one.
he was, yeah, he would have been 70. He died in February. His birthday was in
Right.
July.
Right. So he put in a lot of time out in that lake.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Now, did you then follow in that
Well, yes, I
when you were a kid?
kind of grew up with it.
Mhm.
Being on the island when I was in high school, I got a skiff, and he gave me some nets to play with. I made my pin money in the summer times that way.
Uh-huh.
The last year I was there, I bought a 20-foot cabin boat and used that for fishing.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a good start all the way from knee high.
Yeah, I guess so. And then what happened?
And I after the war, then I joined him. He wanted a bigger boat, and so we went together and bought this steel boat. They
What was
named
its name?
They named it to William G.
Uh-huh.
After.
Right.
But I was still in service when when they named it, so I couldn't argue too much about the name of it. So we had the boat when I got out of service, and we're in partnership with him.
Right.
We were in partnership till 1965 when he sold out to me.
Right. Which was a tough time in the 60s,
Yeah,
right around that time, wasn't it?
That trout fishing lasted till about 1958, which was good fishing for the 8 years we were in it there. We had all the equipment and everything, so we decided to fish for the chubs, which was a lot of extra work, and the price was low on them, but we hung on that way, hoping the trout would come back. But we never did get the trout.
Yeah. And because the lamprey came in then too, didn't
At
it?
58,
Yeah.
that's when they destroyed the trout and whitefish.
And so you hung on all the way through the 60s and into the 70s. And how long did you fish? And when did you hang up the nets?
Well, in all that problems in 68, all of a sudden the markets disappeared on us for 2 years. You couldn't sell chubs. There wasn't enough allotment on trout. There wasn't any whitefish. So that was that. There I was in debt buying an outfit, and I didn't know what to do. I went out to Seattle to see what kind of work was out there. I always liked Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Got in a tugboat that went up to the Aleutian Islands with a tow. Come back in December, which was kind of rough weather. And at that time, well, then my father passed away, so I stayed around. I worked for the ferry boats for a year. I was captain on the Island Queen. And when I was there, George King offered me a job, captain of the research boat, the Hacknoise.
Mm-hmm.
They just got that from the wardens. So I worked there for 10 years.
Uh-huh.
And then retiring, I wanted to get back fishing again. So I tried it for a while, but that didn't work too well because I wound up with a heart problem. So I said, well, that's enough of fishing, having bypass surgery.
I guess so.
So,
Now, what year was that then? Did you-
85?
85.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. 16 years ago, so.
Yeah, it's,
Now, did you still have the William G then, or?
I still had the William G. I kept her. We tried to sell her a couple of times, it didn't work, and get the price and stuff. And it was nice having the boat for just pleasure too.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I used that until my heart problem. So I sold that, and it sold quick this time.
Who'd you sell it to?
A fellow down in Bay City, Michigan. What is his name? Can't think of it.
Clayton
Yeah.
Forrest. Wasn't that it, Forrest?
Forrest Clayton?
Clayton Forrest, I think.
Well, anyway,
So the boat left the area.
it left,
It
yeah.
must have been sad to see that thing go, huh? Huh? I
We
would
had put
guess.
a trip, he wanted us to take it down to Sioux, meet us down there in April, so we headed out. I got about an hour east of Gull Island, and the northeaster came up. So we turned back and laid in at Stockton, thinking, well, the next morning we'll take off again. We spent 5 days there. That was the day that they had the 50-mile-an-hour northeast came up. But that tragedy at Long Island happened. That fella tried to go over with his dog on the land and somehow capsized and drowned.
Uh-huh.
So you can imagine the weather that we did have.
I was so happy to be to have that layover at Stockton, because I was dragging my feet all the while, hoping we wouldn't have to give up the boat, and then we had this layover there, and it was just like having a vacation in it. So we got this last ride. It was really a nice experience, and I had to smile because we'd go to sleep at night. We were supposed to be halfway to the Sioux, or maybe closer to it, and here we were still looking at the lights of Bayfield. And so I think, oh good, now, and then in the morning it would be real bad and we couldn't leave again. So I was really happy for all those bad weather. Foggy and, everything.
Well, after northeaster, we had a northwest snowstorm, so we couldn't leave then either.
We ran out of ice and we began to pick up ice off the shore, these remnants of winter, and use that. The arbutus were blooming, and we'd go for walks. It was just wonderful out there. Go for walks in April. We could tell we were coming to an arbutus patch because the scent was just so powerful. It was really, and I think the marsh marigolds were blooming, and that was an experience that really was a gift
Right.
to have that.
Sort
We
of.
kept in contact with the Millers. They were down at the marina at the time operating that, so that they could be in contact with our buyer, telling them we're late.
Right.
And then her sister came down at the Sioux and picked us up.
So once you did take off, you had fair sailing the rest of the way?
No,
That was another nice thing.
when the weather cleared, we took off at night. So we wound up at the portage just at daybreak. And that went all right. And we pulled in at Big Bay, Michigan. That's just above Marquette. There's a little harbor there.
Mm-hmm.
Next morning, we woke up with a hard northwest snowstorm again.
But when we went in there, it was 70 degrees. It was hot.
Beautiful.
And the next morning, it was just this ice storm. We couldn't believe it.
So we finally pulled in at Grand Marais for one night, and then the next day we hurried out before daybreak to run down to the Sioux.
Mm-hmm.
So we made it all right. But the weather was real fickle. We were afraid of fog down at the Sioux, but instead we got caught in a good southwester coming up that channel, which was all right.
We were looking for the marina that we were supposed to leave the boat or meet for us. And we called on the Coast Guard on the radio to find out where we were. We couldn't tell because it was so rough, and the water was just washing over the portholes, and we could barely see. And they would answer us, and it was so garbled we couldn't understand them. So we were still on our own. We finally found it, but that was the experience.
What happened, I was familiar with the marina. It's down past the city down there. But it was so early in the season they didn't have markers out. So we went by it and finally poked around and found it. And it was closed, but we were able to get electricity and stuff we needed there.
Well, that was quite a trip.
That was a fun trip.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
10 days.
Did it make you have second thoughts about selling?
Well,
One thing, it tested the boat, didn't it? You could.
it proved to our buyer that the boat was running.
It was definitely seaworthy.
Definitely.
That was a good boat. It would take anything.
Bud would have people working for him on the boat, and they'd say, has this ever rolled over? And he'd say, not yet. That I'm sure didn't help.
What can you say?
Yeah, exactly. Now, who else was fishing with you at that time? I mean, who were the other people fishing?
Well, on the island, in the spring of the year, we'd always have some company. Les Cornell was out there, Manny Patan, Orville Powers, John Frostman, those fellas. They would stage there and then go to their own islands when things opened up.
So you each had your territories? You went
Well,
to-
more or less.
Yeah, by gentleman's agreement.
But like Frostman and Powers had that place at Stockton Island, which now is the park headquarters in Anderson Point. And Frostman was there too, yeah. And Manny and Morris were over in Corey Bay. Morris had quite a place over there. Finally, Manny bought property next to us on Madeline, and they put in that big scow. I don't know if you've heard of the sunken barge over there or not, but that scow was brought in from Duluth for a harbor, and then finally got tore apart by the weather. And they put on the map the sunken scow. But that was quite I think there were 7 docks there at one time in Big Bay. There was Emil Erickson, Leonard Erickson, Art Crone, Sievert Tagan. I think that was it for the docks, and they all had hoists. Because at that place, you get a backseat in there, and you couldn't stay at a dock. It was too much of a surge.
Right.
So everybody had a hoist, and you didn't use them all the time, but when the northeast came up, you had to put your boat up or get out of there.
Right.
And of course, it was a good place for the boat in the wintertime.
Now, did you also do ice fishing then in the wintertime?
Not too much. Just enough to know what it was all about. One time it was a real late spring, so we started ice fishing. Of course, my dad knew all about it and had the equipment, so it wasn't that hard.
Right.
But getting out the 1st of March, there just wasn't much time between 1st of January, 1st of March. All we had time was get our nets ready and go again. Or at least we hoped for the 1st of March we'd be ready then and sit and wait for it to open up.
Now, did you have any real close calls out there on the lake?
Well, Woodrush had to come for us one time. There was Orville Powers and Cornell. Orville had the Esther. I don't know if you remember that boat that Bodin's down there or not. And then the Don, that's the one sitting on the beach down here, was Cornell's boat. And we left to set nets out northeast of Outer Island on the outside banks. And coming back in, ice shoved us. That's when your moving ice is coming against solid ice. And we tried to break through, and it just kept shoving underneath us. So it piled it high and dry out of water. All 3 boats were lined up.
Just sitting on top of the ice?
Yeah, more or less. and they could see us from our place on Madeline. Morris Patan was there, and it was open water, but we were still in this iceberg. They brought out dynamite, and we were trying to dig the boats out, but we dug and everything else, and tried dynamite under the boats, and couldn't get loose. So they went back and they called for the wood rush. And of course, this was about the third day we were out there then, and we could see the wood rush coming.
What was the wood rush?
Well, that was the same as the sundew. It's identical. It got replaced by the sundew in Duluth.
Mm-hmm.
And they came down, and we could see them. We were down below Michigan by that time. We drifted down. We could see them coming, and they tried to take a shortcut by Michigan Island, and they wound up on a sandbar off Michigan Island Light. So by that time it got dark, and they finally got off. There was no problem there. And we turned our lights off. Our boat was on such an angle. We had a generator there, but you couldn't run it too long because of the angle we were on. We wouldn't get the oil. Mm-hmm. So we turned our lights off. In doing that, the Coast Guard had lost their bearing on us, and they had gone around a couple extra hours trying to find us in, which we didn't know. We thought they knew where we were and were able to pick us up. So the next morning, then they located us, and of course he run up against the ice pack real hard, to break us out. I heard the skipper holler to somebody else, "No, there's 4 of us."
Oh no!
He was stuck solid. So it took him a while to get off, and they finally did work us off and took us back into our docks.
Oh boy, what an ordeal!
Well, when you're traveling that time of year too, you always have a lot of grub and your bedding and stuff with you, so there was no problem. We were ready for anything like that. Mm-hmm. And gosh, one morning, Les invited us over for breakfast. Here he had bacon and eggs and the whole works. So,
I mean, you walked over to one of the other boats, yeah.
Yeah. So that was about the worst of it.
So that was what, about 3-4 days you were
Mm-hmm.
you were out there?
I would say at least 3 days. I'm not real sure.
Now, this was when? What year?
It had to be around 55, 56.
Right. And Shirley, weren't you a little worried?
Well, we didn't get too much information about it. We did just get the reports that they were hung up out there, but we didn't really know what was happening. And so when he came in and told me about when I heard how it was, but when he came and told me how they were having breakfast together with bacon and eggs and all of that, well, so here I was worrying, and they were having a party out there. But that it worked out all right, and it was a relief. He did a few things that in my inexperience with winters here, I sat up on cemetery on Washington Hill up here one Sunday afternoon watching him walk across, and when the ice was deteriorating in the spring, because he wanted to get out there, and of course there was no way to go, and they didn't have the ferry boats running the way they do now through that ice, so he took a skiff, and it was Bud Cadet, wasn't it?
Bud Cadet and Orville Powers.
2 of them.
We came in for the weekend. The rest of them stayed out there.
Walking across there, and I was watching them go as far as I could see them to make sure that everything would go all right. But they had the boat to get into if they did sink through.
So you were just pulling the boat along behind you, or?
Well, Orville was out ahead a little bit, and Bud and I were on each side of the boat. Mm-hmm. Our problems came when we got over to the other side. That spot just before you get to the island, always candles first, very soft. Mm-hmm. So you'd be walking along, and all of a sudden you'd drop into the water. I mean, there was nothing there.
Oh my God.
Yeah, on the edge of the boat. It was, that candlelight, it just wasn't holding you. And Bud went down one time, and I don't know, he didn't have the strength to pull himself up on the boat again. And I had to reach over the boat and try to haul him in and not tip the boat over. It was just a small ice boat, you know.
Right.
So we got there.
These are things that are better to hear afterward.
Soaking wet. We got out there and drove out to the cabin. Of course, we were 10 miles out from the point. Okay. That part was all right. We always had to change the clothes and stuff with us on the cabins. So. But yeah, it was exciting for a while.
I guess so. God.
Well, it's so different now because people have cell phones and they have almost immediate communication. And in those days, it was not, you didn't hear things right away.
Well, that was before the floating wind slides.
Right.
Yeah.
But Shirley, you must have had a number of worrisome days and nights. Or did you just accommodate it?
I guess it really wasn't, those were some of the things that had happened. I don't recall too many things. If they didn't come in when I thought they were going to be coming in, I would get a little concerned. But for the most part, we didn't have... I used to marvel at the fact that the commercial fishermen never seemed to have any serious problems. And I don't think we ever heard of too many having any problems around.
No.
So they either had very good boats, and of course they were very good seamen because they were so experienced. So it really didn't happen, but very often. And we spent our summers on the island, so we were able to see them coming into the dock for quite a ways, so we could always keep an eye out for them.
Right.
But there were some times, I don't think you ever spent any night away other than on the island anyway, when we were fishing in the summertime.
No, that was the only time we spent on the boat, was when we got caught on that iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're kind of late coming in, but that was just part of the game, I guess.
I need to change batteries here. So. Now, Shirley, well, all those years that he's fishing, what are you up to?
Well, I just was home. I was a homemaker, and during the winter, or during the spring and fall fishing, after we had the children, it was a school, and so we had to be in Bayfield during those months, and Bud would be fishing from the island, and so he would be home on Wednesdays, usually Wednesdays, and then on the weekends. So he was gone for quite a bit of the week, and that was pretty much our routine in the winter until fishing stopped, because the wind sleds weren't operating then, of course, as they are now, and it was just not easy to get in that any oftener than that. And I just spent my years with being at home and baking and cooking and doing volunteer work, and that was it.
Yeah.
And then,
we had the smokefish store in the
well, yeah, that's right, 2 weeks.
Talk about that.
I started that in
62.
62. Decided that was when they were fishing chubs, and Bud, we decided maybe try smoking fish.
Mm-hmm.
And so we built a couple of smokehouse and a shack, a building to sell the fish. We named it the Smoke Shack, and that smoking the fish was quite a process when we began. Maybe Bud would be better at telling about it. It was, we'd put the fish on the racks early in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and then they would build a fire that was a very slow fire that would go all day. So those fish were smoking just about all right up until evening. And then we'd take them off and package them and put them on ice so that it was a long day.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
Now, where was this smoke shack?
On Madeline Island.
No, but I mean exactly where.
Oh.
Was it right by the fish camp there? Or?
It was right, yes, it was right next to the smoke shack was on the one side of the road, and the retail store was on the lakeside. And it was right across the street from the cabins.
So people would drive out there and buy it right from the
Yes,
from
and
you
then
directly.
We had ice and pop and a few gifts.
had a picnic table down on the beach. We really had a wonderful thing going, because when we got out that far, after driving 10 miles, they were looking for something to do and a place to stop and looking for food. So we had David Nurse's maple syrup, and we ordered the maple sugar candy and the smoked fish and crackers and the pop, and we also sold ice to the campers. And so those, it was just it was a paying hobby actually, because that's just all the bigger we could make it. But it was a fun thing to do.
So did you run the smoke shack then?
Pretty much.
Yeah. And how long did that last?
Not very long, unfortunately.
Oh,
There was,
68.
About 5 or 6 years, or
6 years anyway.
and then.
And that's when the bottom fell out of the.
That's when I had to quit,
Yeah.
But before that, there was the Salmonella Scare. Somebody had gotten sick and died, I think, eating some smoked fish that had been botulism. And of course that upset the whole thing for us for quite a while. We didn't know exactly how that was going to turn out, because we certainly didn't. We knew people wouldn't want to buy fish if they were worried about getting sick from it. So we had to change the whole process of smoking fish. So the inspectors came in and told us how we had to do it. And you had to cook it at a higher temperature. And so we had to install gas burners and make it all more automatic. And we had quite a time with that transition, because getting that high temperature and cooking it, we had a thermometer that we had to use to gauge the controls, and had to reach a certain temperature. So it got too hot and all the fish would drop off. We'd close the door and turn on the heat, and all of a sudden.
Okay.
And people loved the fish, so we didn't have any trouble selling it. We did finally figured out how to control the temperature so that we did have good results. And the inspectors would come back, and I think they were really quite impressed with the fact that we were able to work it out, because I think a lot of people were having trouble. But it was so important for them to, as far as the thinking was, that it had to be this high temperature, so there was no chance of anything surviving, any bacteria. So, but our theory is that it really wasn't the smoked fish, it was probably the vacuum packaging that did the product in. Because up until then, fish had been sold. In fact, people didn't even keep it in a refrigerator. They'd sell it on top of the counter,
Right.
and nothing ever happened. So we really think it was that more than the temperature at which it was cooked. But anyway, we did that, and it worked out, and we kept on with that for as long as we could. And and then I'm not sure about the date when it ended.
That's when I had to go to Alaska.
That was it. So
68. Yeah. Now, Shirley, you were probably active in other groups in town here too. What did you participate in? You said you volunteered.
Well, we're active in church.
Now, which church did you go to?
Presbyterian, and we held offices in the various organizations in the church. I belonged to the Women's Civic League and the Junior Civic League, and we did some work with the Boy Scouts. Bud and I were on a committee for Boy Scouts at one time. I can't remember what year that was, but we have a homemakers club in Bayfield that started about 1960, and been involved in that. And I think that's pretty much it.
We worked at Easter Seal.
The what?
You worked at Easter Seal for 2
Oh, yes. I did, in 1968 when Bud started working with the DNR, that year that everything fell apart. I got a job at the Easter Seal shop and was asked to manage that, which I did for about 5 or 6 years.
And where was that?
It started where Joanne's Scandinavian gift shop is. It was in there for about 2 or 3 years, and then the American Legion had its meeting place. It owned the building. They owned it, didn't they? They
Yeah.
owned it.
Mm-hmm.
Where the Sweet Sail, which one was that? The Sweet Sailing Shop?
Oh, it was between the
Oh, it's the one right next to
hardware and
Xanadu.
the-
Right next to Xanadu.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Xanadu.
That shop,
Right.
the American Legion owned that building, and we needed to get out of the place that we were in, and I made arrangements with the Legion to rent their building.
Uh-huh.
So we moved down there, and I worked there for a while, and then
Now, why was it called the Easter Seal Shop?
it was a place where a program that the Easter Seal had out of Madison to have a place for people were handicapped, could make things and have an outlet.
Oh.
And Bayfield was chosen. They had several shops. There was one in Madison and one in Eau Claire and I think Appleton and throughout the state. And Marion Jones came up here looking around and found that they wanted to open one here. And I think Judy Russell worked there the first year they were open, and then she was Marion was looking for someone, and someone recommended me, and I applied and got the job, and it was quite an interesting experience. But it was what we did was sell these products that people made.
Mm-hmm.
They had there was a home crafters organization of Wisconsin. Neil Meyer was involved in that, where they would go around and train people, and then they delivered their products to us. And Easter Seal, I think, charged the home crafters maybe 10%,
Mm-hmm.
and the people got the rest of that. And I remember Mary Rice falling in love with a number of the quilts that one of the home crafters made, and she was had some beautiful quilts
Mm-hmm.
from that. So that, and then Bud started fishing again in around 76, 70, when he retired from the DNR, and then we went back to the island, and so
So you left that job then?
Yeah, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I did work for the outfitters, the previous owner, for a couple of summers. I must have had some time. I think maybe, I think what it was is the kids were working and I stayed in Bayfield while they were working. And I worked at the outfitters, and then I worked for Judy Russell at her dockside
Mm-hmm.
shop here in Bayfield. I don't think it was called dockside, but it was down where the ferry landing is.
Mm-hmm.
I worked there for a couple of summers, and then we went back to Madeline Island, and then we were selling fresh fish from that time. We used our smoke shack for selling fresh fish.
Oh, okay.
But I was going to say, back when we were doing the smoked fish, we sold ice to the campers at Big Bay, and they would come up, and we had little ice blocks that were just we had the ice was out in the ice house. That's where we got it first, all buried under sawdust. And Bud would always load up the cooler with enough ice for the day, and people would come in and buy that, and we'd chip it off to the size they wanted. They'd have these little boxes, and we'd chip it off, and it would come out just perfectly square and fit in those boxes. And once in a while we'd run out of ice, and I'd have to go out to the ice house and dig it out and try to get these 50 or 100 pound blocks out of there and into, so these people could get some ice. And on weekend, or 4th of July, there were so many people coming up for ice that I finally said, if anybody else comes in this door and says, I want some ice, I'm going to just leave. Yeah, we just got, there's so much of it. But it was a nice business. It was just what was needed out there.
Yeah.
And I wish we could have kept it up.
We had a big yellow lab that people would buy the smoked fish and sit at our picnic table on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he'd sit about 10 feet away, looking at them, running the scraps.
Yeah. It was a wonderful time. And,
Now, that lasted until what, about the mid-80s?
mhm.
You said, didn't you fish for about 10 years after you retired? Or
Well, yeah, like I say, when we sold the big boat, I was in hopes of working for the cruise boat. And I worked for Dave's truck one summer.
Oh, you did?
I was captain on the Islander, and then on weekends, or one day, yeah, I guess it was weekends, I'd take the Chippewa. That was a big cruise, if you remember those early days.
I remember that, yeah, I
But
remember the pictures.
that fall, then he went down to Biloxi, Mississippi, and got the Manitou. And we went down there and helped him bring it up. Cheryl and I.
What year would that have been?
86. 86.
80s, yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah, it
Yeah,
was
86.
the same year we sold the boat.
Yeah, fall.
Right.
So that was a nice trip. Came up to Tom Bigby Waterway and the part of Mississippi and then to Chicago and on up.
Right.
When well, then he sold those boats, so I was out of a job again. I went back to the island. I said, well, I'm going to go fishing. So I set some nets off our dock like I did when I was a kid with a skiff. And golly, that worked out all right. There was enough fish for the store and kept us going in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
Till we just recently sold the place. And
So what was the last year you fished then?
till we just recently sold the place. And
So what was the last year you fished then?
5 years ago.
The year we sold the cabin,
Yeah.
must have been 96.
And the state came along with that buyout too.
Right.
But not being a big fisherman anymore, I didn't get the big bucks.
You didn't?
So I was able to sell my license to Dini for a fair amount.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended the fishing, of course.
Right. So Deanie's got your license then?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
well, Mark. Dini's, yeah, he's got a license and there's a couple, 3 licenses in the family there.
Yeah.
And he appreciated getting it because it helped him with his family.
Yeah.
We're glad to be able to sell it to a fisherman and keep the industry going. And he is an excellent businessman.
Yeah.
He's certainly handling it well. He is,
Yeah, he came by Sand Island yesterday.
did he?
Out getting his trap nets out there. And
Yeah. Yeah, he's operating out of Corny a lot too. He got Jimmy Erickson's boat, the Scenic Marie now.
right.
And I'm not sure if he bought another one too. Maybe Ivano's boat. I heard rumors of it, but I'm not sure if he got it.
I don't know either. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the whole state of the fishing. Like when you were in the prime of your fishing, how many boats were in this area, would you say?
I would guess there was about 40 gill netters and about 240 license out. A lot of license are out for herring fishing at certain times, or skiff fishing, or home use fishing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was a good business.
And now how many are there, would you say?
Well, down to Deanie, Morse, and Marty, is as far as I know, and Eric up in Port Wing.
That's it? 4?
Yeah.
Plus some,
There's 9 licenses out, but some of the families have got more than 1 license.
right. So 9 licenses, and then there's the Indian fishermen.
I don't
In
know
addition to
how
that.
many there.
I don't know either.
They're coming and going.
Yeah. So that's a big change
Oh yeah.
for Bayfield.
Very.
You know, in fact, it's even to the point where there's a museum now. You're an artifact. Well,
Well, with
let's
our
hope it keeps
operation,
going.
before I joined Dad and Partners, of course, Then he had to have 2 men on the boat, and then he'd always hire a part-time man fixing nets on shore. Plus all the stuff we needed, the hardware stores and getting ice in the spring. And so it is, for just our own operation was quite a business.
Yeah.
And if you multiply that by, say, 15 good full-time fishermen, you had a lot of employment in Bayfield.
Yeah. Where are we going to get our fresh lake trout and whitefish when
That's the
they're
question.
gone? Huh?
They put the lake trout on the sportsman list, so don't worry about them. Yeah. That was always a big fight too. It was the DNR and the sportsmen.
Yep.
Sportsmen controlled them down in Madison, and it came down through the pipe.
Yep.
Little by little, every year there was more restrictions.
Well, there's so few lake trout that they can catch now, it's almost not worth it, is it?
Yeah, it's limited.
Yeah.
That's why they've gone to the trap nets. They figure they can let the lake trout go, and then I guess the fishermen use their lake trout for winter time when they're using gill nets under the ice.
Mm-hmm.
They tried trap nets under the ice, but that didn't work.
It didn't.
No.
How come?
I really don't know. Of course, they're hard to move, and they take quite a hold to get them under the ice, and a few problems.
Yeah. Did you fish entirely with gill nets?
We're strictly gill netting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You didn't do any pond nets or?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really the end of an era, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think that Deanie and the others can hang on for a while? And what do you think the DNR is going to do?
They're pretty much into the trap nets, and if the whitefish hold out, the herring, they can probably do it. Because they haven't had lake trout to amount to anything for years now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of herring in the lake, they came back, and the spawn is more valuable than the herring.
Now, what do you mean by that?
The roe.
Uh-huh.
Bodins down here are big on that, packaging it.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah.
Have you ever had herring?
Yes.
It's delicious.
Yeah.
I'm surprised there isn't a better market for it. But
Yeah,
I
me too.
suppose it's I suppose they don't have a big enough production maybe to make a
Well,
market.
they could have. If they had a market, they'd get the production.
But it's
Yeah.
very delicious, very good.
Yeah.
That's all they used to fish on the North Shore was the herring. That was a biggie up there.
Yeah.
But I imagine. Well, Deanie goes after them in the spring, I think. There's kind of a market then. And of course the fall, but the price is way down, and then they fish for the roe.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, well, like the Catholic Church over there and their fish fries, that's herring.
Right.
And that's delicious stuff.
Well, Maggie's was serving herring
Was she
in
too?
season, yeah.
Uh-huh.
For, that period this spring when they were catching them.
Oh yeah. So, yeah, there's fish in the lake, but the markets determine a lot of it.
That's right.
Always have. And the fats, that used to be had a fair market on fats, which is your Cisco. You realize they're sub trout.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of collapsed. They just want a few now.
Well, it's such a valuable commodity, and I think increasingly so because fishing all over the world is under siege.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hear about it on the East Coast. Cod fishing out there is going downhill, and
That's right. And it's also what people come here for.
yeah, in
Right.
Bayfield area.
Yeah, come here, have a meal of fresh fish. So
Well, our lake trout used to be the top drawer. People would come and they'd demand good lake trout,
yeah,
which we had too. We had lots of it. I like whitefish, but you can't beat a good lake trout.
That's one thing we've always enjoyed too, is that we'd have, when, on this whitefish that we were selling, the fillets on the island, we had, if there was any left over, we would have those ourselves, and sometimes we were getting them right out of the lake, and you just can't beat that fish when it's right out of, a few minutes out of the lake.
Right. Yeah.
But it was, I think when you turn to another species, it works out pretty well if they have enough. It's mostly a matter of knowing how to cook them, I guess. And this, what I call the, it's the, what is my favorite fish?
Lawyers?
The lawyer. What
That's
is the
your
other name?
Burbot.
Burbot? Well, anyway, the lawyers, you know what they're like. They're so ugly that they're really cute. And and when I would go out with Bud on a boat, it was with when he was lifting after he was alone fishing, and those would come in, and I'd feel so sorry for him because they were all twisted up in the nets, and we'd take them home, and Bud would skin them, and we'd freeze them, and cook them, and they were delicious.
Oh, no kidding.
And I'm surprised that hasn't caught on, because they call it poor man's lobster, and you can put it in chowder, and you can dip it in butter or margarine, and it's good.
And what's the other name for a lawyer?
Burbot.
Burbot.
Burbot. Okay.
Yeah.
Or eel pot up in Minnesota.
Right.
They have that festival up there for lawyers. But I think the sportsmen are beginning to learn that they're good to eat. They used to leave them on the ice when they'd catch them. But I've heard now that they kind of prize them.
And their skin is smooth and satiny. When you touch it, it was, I suppose, very much like a catfish.
Now, Bud, I also know from just talking with you before, you were mayor here at one point, right?
No, not quite, no.
Huh? I thought you were mayor.
No, I was on
You
the
were-
council
You were on the city council.
for about 10 years.
Did you ever run for mayor?
No.
No.
Never
Weren't
won.
interested in it?
No.
You let Ed do that, huh? Now, when were you on the city council? What years?
75 to 85. I quit when I had my heart problems.
Right.
I figured I was enough stress. No kidding, it is a stressful job.
Yes, I'm sure it is.
But in the meantime, I've been on the planning along with it and stayed with the planning, which is interesting.
Yeah. And what were the issues that you had to deal with in that 10-year period here in Bayfield City Council?
One of the hardest ones was liquor. The taverns or restaurants wanted to serve beer and wine, and at that time they weren't allowed to. And the public, I mean, the people we talked to didn't want to have it served either around town.
Why not?
They're kind of concerned about it. Just too much liquor in town, I guess.
You mean the local people?
Yeah, young kids and so forth, being in the restaurants.
Right.
So we kind of held off on that.
And when did that finally get?
When I got off the council, the next year they passed it.
It took that long.
Allowed
So the
restaurants to
only
have it.
so the only liquor license were with Morty's and
The taverns.
Bates and what else?
Juniors.
Juniors.
And what do they call it? Rum line now. But also there was a problem with Rittenhouse. We didn't want to give them one, and of course they needed it for their gourmet foods,
Right.
which was quite a situation. But
Jerry Phillips was down there
yeah,
lobbying.
and, Ed Erickson was mayor, and he had to break the tie vote to give it to him.
Is that right?
He didn't want to for a long time, but he finally did. So,
And
Yeah,
what else was going on in Bayfield in those years?
well, there's a few changes in the zoning ordinances, but nothing too great there. I think on the council we started a program where every year they wanted to fix up a certain road in Bayfield. I don't know if that's still continuing or not.
Mm-hmm.
Some improvements like that. When I first started in council, we didn't have a city hall. We met in the library down here.
Oh, you did?
Finally, when the power company moved out of that building, they got hold of it. So yeah, the clerk took all the records home, and it was kind of a hassle too. So.
It was really a more informal small town council in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lot more complicated now.
Isn't it?
Oh, yes.
And in the planning committee and these, we had a police and fire department committee, and they were just getting started, just getting off the ground. We had trouble with one policeman, and they finally disbanded the fire and police department. What do they call it? That was a committee, wasn't it? Yeah.
I think so.
Now, what do you mean?
Well, they tried to overrule the council on the police work and so forth, and
Uh-huh.
a lot of friction there, so they figured that was enough.
Just got rid of them. And how many cops did Bayfield have in that time? Did they just have one?
They had 3 when I got on the council.
They did have 3.
And I think they had part-time in the summertime, I'm not sure. So,
And today, there's 3 as well, right? Are there 3 now?
3 or 5. Or 2 of them part-time.
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty sure there's 3 full-time.
Yeah.
And of course with a budget, that was always a problem. They'd fight over a squad car, whether it needed to be replaced or not. We had to buy a new fire engine, new ambulance at the time.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of, on a short budget, whether you can afford, you can't afford. People wanted it, people didn't want it. So, yeah, it was all business, I guess.
So you were from this district then?
Yes.
Did they have the same arrangement they have now?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I think they added just a couple of blocks on the second ward here
Mm-hmm.
at the time. But I think there's talk about changing the wards now. But they're pretty much the same.
Yeah. Well, small town politics.
Yeah. Well, when I was on, Tony Kowalkiewicz was with me all the way. And he went back on afterwards too.
Who were some of the others?
Ed was a mayor, and Brub they'd keep trading off.
Mm-hmm.
And
Locksmith, you're talking about.
yeah, Brub Locksmith. Mike Locksmith was a councilman, and what's his name? I can't think. I can't put a name on him. Our friend over here.
I don't know what you mean.
Well, the guy who's doing yard work now.
Who?
The one that does yard work and maintenance on homes.
Well, that's all
Oh,
right.
Rick Thompson.
Yeah, right.
Rick Thompson.
Yeah.
Oh, was he on the council?
Yeah, he was on.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Well, he went on county board for a term too.
Didn't he run for mayor too one time?
Probably, I can't remember.
So,
Mhm.
And Clifford Hadlin was on when I was on the council for a while. I can't remember the terms, but those are some of the people we worked with.
Well, you've seen the town change quite a lot, haven't you, in the last?
Oh yeah, there's been a lot of
years.
changes.
And
it got so.
Mm.
Excuse me.
no, go ahead.
It was when we were first here. When I first came, it was a quiet, quiet little town with commercial fishing, logging, and that type of thing. And we were pretty self-contained. We had a lot of number of grocery stores and a drugstore, a dry goods store. Because that was Jack Lee still had it, wasn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And dry, yeah.
There was that, and gradually those things changed, and we finally didn't have for instance, like Jack Lee had this called the Red Front store, and it was
Where was that now?
it was
where Andy's is now.
Andy's,
Mhm.
and it had a variety of types of things, and when he closed, it kind of set down your chance to get things like throwing thread or a needle or something, and gradually you got till you went to Ashland for shopping because you have so many things you couldn't get here. And then when it's made the change back now, we have more of those things here now. It took a while to get used to shopping back in Bayfield again.
Mm-hmm.
But it has, I think when I first came here, it was much easier to just stay in Bayfield and get what you wanted.
Right.
Well, groceries are delivered to the home. And we had credit, we'd pay once a month or when we could. So,
You call up and order them over the phone, and
Yeah.
they'd deliver them. And of course, we had those the type of telephones you had to ring to get the operator. And,
Who was the operator? Do you remember?
Yes, it was.
Chase.
Uh,
Fucos were there for a while.
Fuco, and I can't remember her first name. Mrs. Fuco was the telephone operator, and Helen Cease was, I believe, before that.
Mhm.
And you had a service there with the telephone that if you're going to go someplace, you could call her up and tell her where you're going to be, and she'd call you there if you had a call. So it was almost nicer than it is now.
Well, the town was kind of buzzing. It was part-time work. But you started out with strawberries, raspberries, and you had beans. We had that big cannery down here. They turned out a tremendous amount of beans. Then you went into the apple, and there were a lot of truckers that trucked the apples out of here.
Mm-hmm.
From there, it went into the herring. They trucked herring out of here. They had the railroad was down there. It went right alongside the cannery, so you filled a railroad car with the cannery goods. And the herring was the same way down at that area, right alongside the buildings, which they're down now. But
Where was the cannery?
it's where our parking lot is,
Mm-hmm.
and further down into that the bottom slope there.
Right.
Well, the parking lot, of course, is the railroad and the turntable, but
Mhm.
one siding was right alongside the building. And then it went into herring season, and you had all these little shacks and a lot of part-time workers. If workers had come and get their Christmas money picking herring, so women and kids and everybody that could. So it was just buzzing all the way through. You had a couple boat builders at one time, back in the 30s,
Mhm.
Mulkey's and Christensen,
That's
LaBelle.
Marie Nelson's dad. Right?
Yeah.
Mulkey.
Yeah. And there was a box factory down there, right next to where the offices, where the museum is now. It was a big box factory. Made strawberry boxes and
Mhm.
crates and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a lot of things going at one time. It just gradually disappeared.
Yeah, and now it's a lot of reliance on tourists.
Only.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is, what do you think about that?
Well, I personally don't care for it because we're not in the business at all. But they're not. I guess we're getting along with them.
Well, we've talked about this on the planning task
Mhm.
force, is that there has to be more than that.
Yeah.
Something to
Yeah.
provide year-round employment. And get back to where there's different things going on and products made here and so on.
It's hard to visualize anything that can do that. It is compatible with Bayfield. Looking at marine and marinas, but that's part-time work too, more or less.
Yeah, that's right.
I would have liked to seen a big shop come in where they could overhaul boats and patch boats and engines and stuff, but it never materialized. Washburn has a pretty good setup down there for that.
Right. Yeah, that would be a perfect adjunct to everything. If you had something like that.
And it'd be what people want with all these boats that are in Bayfield. So maybe someday.
Well, there's bound to be many more changes, coming, particularly in the next few years, I think.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
It seems to be accelerating. I've been coming here for a little over 20 years, and have seen it change dramatically.
Yeah,
along with the prices.
Well, it seems like it couldn't get any busier, but I think it does. I'm sure there are more people here all the time in the summertime, and I know that Bayfield depends on that, but it does concern me about how many we can handle without an overload. And I imagine Madeline Island is even worse because everybody, just the day people alone can almost sink the island.
Yeah.
But it's and it's fun to see people come, and where we live here, as close as we are to downtown, we really don't have a feeling that it's crowded at all. It's just when you get a couple of blocks away, and then it's amazing to see all the cars parked up and down the streets early in the morning, so you know that something is going on.
Yeah, there were a lot this weekend. A lot of people in town.
Yes.
very crowded. Yeah.
And I haven't heard whether the storekeepers are happy or not, if they're finding that, I guess everybody was worried about the gasoline prices, and I don't think that stopped anyone, so. But it's such a beautiful place, and I'm hoping that it can stay that way so that people can come and leave and still, it hasn't affected it too much.
Yeah.
I am concerned about people that are buying property, where they're going to put them all if they want to move in, with all of the zoning restrictions there are.
Mm-hmm.
So that it has to be worked out too.
Well, and now again, we've gone over 50% of the houses in town are owned by seasonal people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which that changes everything right there. You know how it is in the wintertime here.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty dead.
It's pretty quiet.
Yeah.
Almost something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm.
When you go downtown, you can find a parking place again. It's kind of nice.
Well, there's one thing about these older houses, they are fixing them up and they're keeping them in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they don't contribute in the wintertime.
No, and it's, I'm with you. I like it in the wintertime here when it's quiet and, we can go downtown. But it'd be much more, if there were more winter residents, the town would have more of a life.
Mm-hmm.
And you worry about the school and so on.
There's so many people just leave for the winter, even if they have a place here, they are gone. Mm-hmm. And that is when they have a second home. But it's and it's beautiful in the winter time, and I think I think people are coming more and more in the winter too.
Mm-hmm.
When in the 50s there was no place to stay, as you know, in Bayfield. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of that, and everything closed down. And as soon as things began to open up and people could come and stay, that made a big change in the winter business.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and more people are doing winter sports and stuff.
Yeah, there's a
now,
lot
too.
more activity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you guys go away in the winter at all? Somewhere?
We have. We do every once in a while. We have taken a trip, gone for a few weeks and traveled. Mostly we have a travel trailer and we've taken that. I have a brother in Arizona and we visit him, and my other brother has a place in, Artie Kennedy is here in the summer, but he has a place in Green Valley and we visited there. So it's kind of a reason to go. And of course Las Vegas is fun to visit every, after we recover our losses to go back. But that, normally we don't go every winter.
So you're not snowbirds?
No, not
No,
regular ones.
Well, our son was down in Florida in the Navy, and we'd go down there and visit him a few times. He was at Jacksonville.
Uh-huh. And where is he now?
He's up in Superior.
What does he do?
He put his 20 years in for the Navy, come out as chief, and now he got a job in the university up there as security guard.
Uh-huh.
He's been there, 4 years now?
About 4.
He settled in as permanent, so.
And he's married? Children?
Couple kids.
You got a couple grandkids there?
He's married to Brenda, and he has a stepdaughter, Tracy, who is married and has a daughter. And Mike, and they have a daughter of their own who just graduated from high school. Her name is Holly.
So do they get up here to Bayfield?
Yes, and
Visit you?
they come, they don't stay, they come just for the day. They've been pretty well tied down with school activities, and Mike had, his work at first was nighttime, so it never worked out for people doing things in the daytime and him being free in the evening. So, but now he's on a day job, so they can get here once in a while. And
They make a point of coming down for the Apple Festival.
yes.
And we treat them to the fish boil down there at the pavilion.
Well, what else haven't we covered here?
I don't know. I think we've pretty well covered it.
I mean, are there any other favorite stories you have or experiences that we haven't touched on, or people that you're particularly good friends with and you did things with?
Well, I don't know. I can't think of anything.
Oh, we still got ties with the island. Dick Bodin's kids in Rogers have hunted out there for years, hunting season. So I rented our cabins back for this season to get them out there. I think there'll be 8 or 10 of us
Oh, is that right?
in a hunting group. So we keep touch that way.
Bud invited his nephew to go hunting, and he brought his 11-year-old son along with him. And of course, they play poker. They go out on Fridays, and on Friday night they play. The guys will play poker. And this Kurt, his nephew's son, beat him all at poker, and here he is. He just playing probably the first. I think he's good at cards. I don't know how much poker he plays, but he beat them all. And Dick Bodin finally said, this kid is beginning to irritate me. And the other thing was that the next day they went out and he got a deer right away.
Yeah.
And what was that? How did that go? He shot a deer, and I had never done that before. So he was doing everything perfectly. Not making himself too popular, probably.
No, upstaging his elders. That's no good.
Well, at one point in that poker game, he was betting, and somebody says, "Well, be careful on your bets. It's not my money."
Yeah. Probably why he won. He had no fear of losing.
Dad was sitting next to him. It's lots of fun with those guys.
I remember going out with Bud setting nets in the wintertime, in the fall, when yeah, in the winter before the season would
December.
close about the end of December, and we'd go out in some of that bad weather, and it would be snowing so hard you couldn't see, and it was really scary trying to you had to put your head outside the window to look because of the portholes got so fogged up, and it was really, there were some times when that was not fun, but it was interesting to be out and see what he was doing.
And what was your job to?
Steering. I had the easy job. I wasn't very good at the other parts of it, pulling in the nets. Of course, on the William G, it was automatic, but he needed somebody to steer, and I was good at that. So that was pretty much. And I tried to help.
First mate, huh?
Yeah, tried to help where I could, but it was. He was able to handle it that way by having somebody along like that, without hiring someone.
Well, that's after I started up, and I wasn't big enough to put on a big crew, so.
Right. So it was just the two of you on the boat then?
She would help along and get along. But having your head out the porthole, that was the days before we had radar too.
Mm-hmm.
We just went by compass and clock.
Boy. And you had to really know the lake then.
Take a chance here and there.
Because even with compass and clock, the currents could
Oh, sure. Yeah.
blow you off course, right? Or,
At times, if you run an hour, sometimes you'd be short 10 minutes or so. And you'd be off. I mean, you could drift sideways too. So
yeah.
it was.
It always amazed me that they were able to find those little sticks with a little flag on them out in the middle of the lake. It was how they ever could get back to those nets. I still marvel at that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
Good compass. Good compass.
Yeah.
a good a pilot too, a good operator. But it was get up early in the morning and go out and be riding along, and it would seem like we would have been out there for hours. Maybe it was time, I'd think, well, maybe it's time for lunch, and I'd look at my watch, and it was only 8:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And the timing was much different in that. The islands are, when you're out among the islands, you notice how confusing it can get too.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're past an island, but it's still the same one. And you're looking at another one, you think, and it's still the same island. And it was, so to me, riding along with my inexperience, just as a passenger practically, it was to be able to figure out where those nets are and where to set them and all of those spots is still a mystery to me.
Well, it was an art in a way.
In our,
Hmm?
It was a good living, good livelihood.
Well, it was in your blood,
More or less,
wasn't it?
I guess
mean,
so.
it had to be if you went back after you retired. Do you miss it now?
Not really. No. I had to buy a boat. I got a little 16 foot with an outboard.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted one I could put in the garage at night after watching a boat for all those years.
Yeah.
We get out on the lake every once in a while.
Well, that's good. Yeah. Well, anything else that occurs to you?
I think we pretty well covered it.
I think
haven't
we did. Mm-hmm.
Well, I tell you did a great job. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And
Well, it's been fun talking, yes.
yeah,
Yes.
well, it's fun for me because I learn a lot every time I do one of these.
I imagine you're hearing some of the same things though, aren't you? Or at least you're corroborating maybe what you have heard.
Well, no, everybody's story is different. I mean, everyone has their own experiences, their own impressions. If you add it all up, you get, a picture that's of the same time and so on. But there's still a lot of blanks to fill in.
We've enjoyed the tapes that we have seen. I still smile over Fern Pulaski's.
Yeah.
That was just so
Priceless.
good.
Yeah, she was a character, wasn't she?
Oh, she was. You must have enjoyed doing that one.
Oh, yeah. It was hard to, because I kept laughing, in the background. Yeah, she was a character. And that's something that's missing too. There's not as many characters in this town as it seems like there used to be.
Probably not, because there's so many. It's just a big turnover, and when I first came here, people were still speaking with a Swedish Scandinavian accent, and some were you could hardly understand because they were really into their own. They're still speaking their own language,
Right.
and it was very Scandinavian, and it's a big turnover,
Yeah.
much, and in age groups too, probably.
I think the smaller knit groups, you could get a character, and then he would kind of enlarge on it too.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you say, now it's a turnover of people, and you don't pick out the individual characteristics of a person to